Hey guys, no surprise, Crimulus here, and today I'm going to show you my Crimson and Warp Stem and Shroomlight farm. Okay, so first, I just want to walk you through why I designed this farm when there's plenty of other designs out there. First of all, it's just fun to make stuff with redstone. If there's another farm out there that you like better, by all means, use it. I'm the last person who will ever claim my builds are the end all, be all of anything, unless I can objectively prove it. I just wanted to build a farm that was focused solely on getting as much bulk wood as possible, while also making it easy to get a large supply of Shroomlights. Any other yields from the farm, from my point of view, are just bonuses. However, and secondly, my farm does offer a few advantages the other farms I've seen tend not to. One, it's about as compact as you can make a nether stem farm, but still yields the near maximum amount of stems and Shroomlights. Two, it uses very few resources, and so is perfect for early game. Three, it grows 2 huge fungi at once, so you can stock up on both types of nether stems. 4, it easily adapts to dispensers or duplicators. 5, it's modular and straightforward to adapt to varying space requirements. And 6, it can be run in manual mode if you prefer to place the fungus yourself. Theoretically, it could even be adapted to the regular overworld trees, except for dark oak, but this tutorial won't go into that. The only real disadvantage to this farm is that it's not bone meal neutral like some of the others. If you have the space, you don't want to invest bone meal, then check out those farms. I'll link a few in the description if I don't forget, but most of us have a flushing mob farm or a skeleton spawner farm, so if that's you and you're like me, you're not worried about the bone meal. As an aside, if you do compost everything, presumably aside from the Shroomlights, you'll get about a 10% return on your bone meal, even with this farm, but personally, I just keep all the drops in separate filters. This video is also not going to be a block by block build tutorial. It's just not the kind of tutorial that I personally like to watch, so it's really hard for me to make that kind of video. However, I will provide a world download so you can easily grab a schematic for either the TNT duping or the dispensing farm, or otherwise just play around with it. And I'll also break down the individual components that make it so that if needed, you can adapt it to your own build site. So what kind of rates does it generate? I ran a lot of testing, and no matter how big I made the farm, I tended to get between a shulker box and a shulker box and a half of stems per hour of use, using somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 shulker boxes of bone meal. I also got anywhere from 1 to 2 stacks of Shroomlights per hour, and that's an extremely good rate given how easy this farm is to build and use. Now, yes, the huge fungi will grow up to 27 blocks tall, but the vast majority of the trees stay well below that. And in my testing, building a farm taller than this simply didn't return significantly more materials than the other. This farm returns 100% of the stems that generate, up to 100 per fungus. If you do want more, it's relatively trivial to make it taller, as you'll see later in the tutorial, but the returns rapidly diminish above this size. You will need an absolute minimum build area for this farm of 9 blocks wide, 17 blocks deep, and 21 blocks tall. And that's not counting the tops of the huge fungi that the farm ignores. So the blocks will still grow up there, just the farm doesn't harvest it. So keep that in mind in your build. Okay, so this is the primary engine of the farm, and all nether stem farms use some variation of this. For each huge fungi that'll grow, there's a block it actually grows on, plus the 2 dispensers of bone meal, the lower one to ensure the block stays at nylium, as well as growing vines, fungus, and roots on it, and the upper one to bone meal the fungus when it generates to grow it into a huge fungus. When starting your build, in my opinion, the ideal placement is to have the top of this top dispenser even with ground level. The engine is powered by a fast clock with 2 observers facing one another. And I know my on-off switch here seems complicated for this, but I built it that way so that it could also control the clock in the next part of the build. Also notice that there are 4 lower nylium blocks here. These are source nylium and are what allows the lower dispenser to convert netherrack back to nylium in case it disappears. I've intentionally put 1 of each type of nylium on each side so that the farm randomly goes back and forth. It's not required, but I found that the dispensers seem to have directional preference. So whichever of the huge fungus is growing closest to the clock, that type of stem is generated from the farm most often. By randomly swapping that, it helps keep the split of stems even over time. Keep in mind though that this is still heavily dependent on RNG. Even in an 8-hour session, sometimes I still saw one type of stem generate more often than the other. Over time though, it'll stay pretty equal. If you only want one type of stem to generate, simply replace the source blocks with the corresponding nylium. So now that we have our basic growth engine, we need to start adding some automation to it. If the lower dispenser bone meals the nylium and roots or vines generate, we're stuck. Nothing else will grow there until it's removed. So periodically we want to retract and replace the growth blocks so that more things can grow there. RNG again plays a role here, as we'll definitely have some fungus that does not get bone mealed enough to grow into a huge fungus. But in my testing, I found that this 8 redstone tick clock that retracts the source blocks for the minimum of 2 redstone ticks, 1 down tick, 1 up tick, is the optimal speed to do so to balance farm output and bonemeal / TNT efficiency. If you want to play with the clock, you can adjust either of these outer repeaters and even add in additional repeaters if you desire, but the repeater coming out of the monostable circuit right here into the block powering the pistons must be at least 2 ticks and really should never be more than 2 ticks, or you're losing time where fungus could be growing. You can also see why I built the on-off switch the way I did, as it's able to both start the dispenser clock as well as the clock powering the block source retraction. So we're still just bonemeal and blocks, but we're adding automation. So we added this clock to retract the pistons. Now we need to add another machine, but I'm going to show it to you standalone to begin with so you can understand how it works. It's a very clever, compact double piston extender, and we'll use this to push the blocks that grow out of the way so new fungus can grow. I'm really not sure who came up with it, but I learned it when I was building gnembon's 5-way tree farm. The contraption is a double piston extender on one block and a single piston extender on the other. So you can see where it pushes these 2 blocks out, 2, and this one. So run it again. This will all be in the download so you can test this yourself. In using this as our mechanism, we can greatly compact the growth chamber and still save all the blocks that grow in the 3 vertical columns around the tree, here, here, and here. And you can see the shape that it generates as we push it out. So pistons can be powered by quasi-conductivity, so we're able to power both layers of pistons from a single power source. Once the back pistons push forward, the observers give another pulse to the front pistons, thus triggering the double piston action. Okay, so now we need to install the double piston extender into our farm. So you can see how I did it here. This will allow us to automatically grow fungus without having to chop down the trees. We're going to push the blocks into a blast chamber, but for now, just think of it as pushing it out of the way. As you can see, when a huge fungus grows, if we trigger the double piston extension, the blocks are moved and the gnembon is bonemealable again. But for the very bottom block, there's not enough room for the double piston extension, so we just use a single piston motion. Very few wart blocks generate this low anyway, so there's not much gain to adding that extra growth space anyway. In fact, if you're really strapped for resources, not all of the double piston extenders are even necessary. This first layer would actually be optional, since most of the Shroomlights and wart blocks generate above that. However, I strongly recommend keeping it in. So the next step is to build 4 more double piston extenders above the first one, and then also add a way to automatically trigger them when a huge fungus grows. So you can see how I built these here. They're just a repeat of this. The power line is slightly different, but you can follow how I changed it. The only part of my farm that uses a mechanic I haven't seen used in other farms, using a leaf block placed here 1 Y level above the 2 growth blocks. Leaves have this great property of triggering an observer. You look on the in the corner right hand side here, you can see the distance at 7. That value will change if the leaf gets closer to a wood block. And while botanically speaking, these huge fungus stems aren't quote unquote wood, those of us who play the game know they're wood for all intents and purposes, and most importantly, they trigger this mechanic in leaves as well. When a huge fungus grows, regardless of which side of this farm it grows on, the observer chain is triggered. Observer, observer, no block, observer. It triggers and toggles this T flip-flop that extends and retracts our pistons. When a huge fungus grows, it automatically extends the pistons, and then this causes the leaf's block distance to change again, triggering the T flip-flop again, and causing the pistons to retract. Pretty clever if you ask me, but I'm biased. Now, it's up to you if you want to stair-step your power up in a different way, but in order to prevent accidentally zero-ticking some sticky pistons and allowing fungus to grow in between blocks in here, the power needs to stay on for a full 4 redstone ticks. That's why this repeater is configured the way that it is. Additionally, if you choose to make the farm taller, you may need to add an additional repeater to the top, since the signal from a redstone block will only carry for 15 blocks. So just keep that in mind. Most of the farm is now actually built, but I'm going to add a little upgrade here that's absolutely worth it. This will help save any extra item entities from roots, vines, etc. that drop here on this platform. Any items that fall here on this 5x3 will either be picked up by these hoppers or the hopper minecarts underneath here, or it will otherwise eventually be pushed forward and out into the collection chamber. This yellow glass is optional. There's here and here, but highly recommended. If you see yellow glass, it's optional, but highly recommended. This glass here prevents the gnembon from things growing on this source gnembon, and then these other blocks just help make sure that the items get picked up back here, make sure the majority of the items get picked up by a hopper. The blocks above the gnembon need to be transparent full blocks. Everything else can be whatever block you like, except for this. This has to have a blast resistance. It is susceptible to the blast from the TNT in the blast chamber. All the items picked up by this system feed into this dropper, which is powered by the same clock that powers the dispensers. So any items that go into here when the farm is running will spit out like that. How to get these hopper minecarts in here? You just place your hoppers first, coming out into this chain into the dropper. Then you put down your rail, like so. Then your hopper minecarts on top of that. Then your leaf and your glass, and you're good to go. The rest of this, you can see how they all just fill right into here. So now, the very last thing to do is build the blast chamber and the collection area. For the blast chamber, we're going to use 2 blast resistant blocks in these very specific locations. This can be crying obsidian, ancient debris, netherite blocks, etc. But for optimum blasting, the lower block should be the 7th block out from this stone brick, and the other block should be 5 blocks above that and 1 back. To trigger the TNT, we're just going to steal power from our double piston extenders. The TNT dispensers / duplicators do not have to be at this Y level. It's just convenient, and building it like I've done here will guarantee that the TNT doesn't blow them up. If you do build it the same as I did, these pieces of red glass are absolutely imperative. Without this, or some other transparent block in these places, a huge fungus will eventually grow, and the warp block will cut off the redstone to the dispensers, disabling the farm. One other thing to note is this pulse extender in both versions is absolutely essential. Sometimes the huge fungus grow in quick succession, and if the TNT is triggered too often, you're going to get a mess. This pulse extender is nearly exactly the same time as the detonation of TNT, so it guarantees that TNT is only detonated once in that period. Occasionally, the right conspiracy of events will cause a temporary backup in the farm because of this delay, but it eventually catches back up. This is absolutely necessary or the farm's going to blow up. Aside from that, the power just goes into the dispensers or the duplicators like this. And note that here on the TNT dispensers, I've used this setup with the T flip-flops so that the TNT is dispensed only every other growth, as it saves nearly half the TNT. There's probably even an opportunity to optimize that even further, but when I started seeing 10 stems for single TNT, I was content. And you can see here, 2.5 stacks of TNT, 1 stack of TNT, roughly law of averages, it's about half, and pretty much the same amount of wood. So then we just fill the farm with bone meal and profit. The chests and collection area are actually the majority of the bulk of the size that you see here. And most of the farm itself is this little guy, right? You can feel free to add or remove as many chests depending on how you want to run the farm, or how long you want to run the farm. But for an overnight session, you'll want to stock up on bone meal, otherwise you'll run out. So something like this. Also, this yellow glass I've added here, this is additionally highly recommended yellow glass. So this at the top, it doesn't have to be yellow glass, but it needs to be a transparent block. And it's just here so that you can open these. Ward block and such will grow in here eventually and block you from opening the chest. And then these below here are just a platform that you can stand on so you can come in here and fill the dispensers. And then finally, the last upgrade I might suggest is maybe filling in all these blocks in here just to help it keep it clean. So you can fill these in with glass through here. You can fill it in the middle like this. This is not necessary. It just helps keep it clean. You can also put signs on the outside so it makes it easier for you to come in here and maintain it if you need to. Again, not necessary. It can help. So it's something you might want to consider. And then you might also want to even run some lights up and around the edges, maybe something like this, up and around to help keep mobs from spawning on the blocks. So that's it. I know it might still seem like a lot in some cases, but I hope by walking through the components you're able to see how it's just an assembly of a handful of smaller contraptions. Leave a comment below if you think there are any ways that I can improve the farm or optimize it further, or just let me know how it works for you. Otherwise, if you want to help show your support, feel free to drop a like, subscribe to my channel so you're the first to see any new ideas I publish, or catch me over on twitch.tv/Shroomlight where you can see me way more often working on all kinds of things. Aside from that, I'll see you guys in the next video.